The sun was a golden coin in the sky, but for Moyo, the world was a place of sounds and smells. He knew Amina by the soft swish of her dress and the sweet scent of the coconut oil in her hair. He would lead her through the busy market, his voice painting pictures for her. "The mangoes are a bright sunset orange today," he would say, "and the cloth seller has a new roll of fabric that is the blue of a kingfisher's wing." Amina's world was built from Moyo's words, and she loved him for it. But Moyo wanted more for her. He wanted her to see the colors he described. He remembered her touch on his face, her fingers tracing his features, and he ached for her to truly know him. One day, he heard a whisper about a woman who lived near the great baobab tree at the edge of town. They said she could do impossible things. Her name was Mama Kofi. He found her in a small house filled with the smell of drying herbs. She was old, her face a map of wrinkles. "I can give the girl sight," Mama Kofi said, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "But magic has a price. The scales must balance. For her to see, someone must take on her darkness. For her to have light, you must take her blindness." Moyo did not hesitate. "I will do it," he said, his heart pounding like a drum. "I will take her darkness." He loved Amina more than he loved the light. He would live in the shadows if it meant she could see the Sunday. Mama Kofi gave him a small, smooth stone. "Give this to her. When she holds it, the change will begin. But remember, boy, the deepest darkness is not in the eyes, but in the heart." Moyo did not understand her warning. He was very happy. He rushed back to Amina, the stone clutched tightly in his hand. He found Amina sitting under their favorite tree, her head tilted as she listened to the birds. "Amina, I have a gift for you," Moyo said, his voice trembling with excitement. He placed the warm stone in her palm and closed her fingers over it. "It is a magic stone. It will help you see." Amina laughed, a beautiful sound he loved. "Oh, Moyo, you and your stories." But then she gasped. The stone felt hot in her hand. A tingling feeling shot up her arm. She squeezed her eyes shut, and when she opened them, everything was a blur of confusing, bright shapes. "Moyo," she whispered, her voice full of fear and wonder. "I see light." Moyo smiled, tears in his own eyes. But as he looked at her, the world around him began to fade. The vibrant green of the leaves turned to a dull gray, then to nothing. The bright blue of the sky dissolved into a deep, endless black. The colors vanished, one by one, until there was only darkness. A heavy, silent blanket fell over his eyes. He had given his sight to Amina. He was now blind. Amina blinked, her world exploding into color. She saw the brilliant green of the grass, the red flowers near the tree, the brown of the bark. It was overwhelming and beautiful. She turned to Moyo, seeing him for the very first time. He had a kind face, with warm eyes that were looking at her, but they seemed empty. "Moyo," she said, her voice full of awe. "Your eyes, they are the color of rich soil after the rain." Moyo reached out, his hand searching for hers. "I am glad," he said softly. But a cold fear was starting to grow in his heart. He could not see her. He would never see her smile. He could only hear her voice, which now sounded different, filled with a new light he could not witness. Amina helped Moyo walk home. She described everything she saw, her words tumbling out in a joyful rush. "The children are playing with a ball that is yellow like the sun. That woman's headscarf has every color of the rainbow." Moyo held her arm tightly, his steps unsure. The familiar path was now a terrifying maze of unseen obstacles. He stumbled on a stone he could not see. Amina caught him, her grip strong. For the first time, she was leading him. That night, Moyo lay in his dark room. He heard the sounds of the night, the crickets, the distant music, but he could not see the moon or the stars. He felt a loneliness so deep it was like a hole inside him. He had given away half of his world. He hoped with all his heart that it was enough to make Amina happy. He hoped her love for him would be his new light. The next day, Amina went to the market alone. For the first time, she saw the vibrant chaos, the piles of spices, the colorful stacks of fabric, the smiling faces of the people. She felt free and powerful. People greeted her, surprised to see her walking with such confidence. "Amina, you can see," they exclaimed. She laughed and nodded, feeling like a new person. She saw Kofi, the handsome woodcarver, smiling at her from his stall. His smile was bright and straight. He had strong hands from his work. Amina, he said, the world is lucky to finally have your eyes upon it. She felt a blush creep up her cheeks. No one had ever looked at her like that before. Moyo had always described her as beautiful, but she had never seen the look in someone's eyes when they said it. When she returned to Moyo's house, she was buzzing with excitement. Moyo, you will not believe what I saw. Kofi the carver has made a statue of a leopard that looks so real. Moyo sat in a chair, his face turned towards the sound of her voice. He felt a pang of something sharp and unpleasant, jealousy. He knew Kofi was handsome and popular. Now Amina could see that for herself. I am happy for you, Moyo said, but his voice was flat. He could not join in her excitement. He could only listen to it from the shadows. The gift he had given her was already building a wall between them. He had given her the world, but in doing so, he was losing his place in hers. Days turned into weeks. Amina spent more time outside exploring the village. She often visited the market, and she often stopped at Kofi's stall. She loved watching his hands shape the wood. He would tell her stories and make her laugh. With Kofi, she felt like a normal young woman, not someone who needed to be guided and cared for. Meanwhile, Moyo stayed inside. The world of darkness was a scary place. Sounds were louder and more confusing. He bumped into furniture. He missed the doorways. He felt useless and angry. He had made the sacrifice for love, but where was the love now? Amina's descriptions of her days were full of things he could not see, and often full of Kofi. One afternoon, Amina came home late. I am sorry, Moyo, she said, her voice bright. Kofi was showing me how he finds the best wood in the forest. It was so interesting. Moyo turned his head away. I am sure it was, he whispered. The darkness around him felt heavier, colder. He felt a new emotion, one he had never felt before. Regret. Had he made a terrible mistake? Moyo decided he had to learn to live in his new world. He started to practice moving around his small house, memorizing the number of steps from his bed to the door, from his chair to the table. His hands became his eyes, learning the shape of everything. But the outside world was still a terrifying mystery. He missed the simple joy of walking under the Sunday. Amina, however, was changing. The more she saw, the more she wanted. She started to wear brighter clothes. She styled her hair in new ways. She was becoming the beautiful woman Moyo had always described, but she was doing it for a world that could see her, a world Moyo was no longer a part of. She was drifting away, like a boat whose rope had been cut. Moyo's heart ached. He could feel her slipping away. He tried to hold on with his words. Amina, remember the story I told you about the moon and the river? He asked one evening. Amina was looking out the window, watching the fireflies. Oh yes, Moyo. It was a lovely story. But her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about the dance in the village square tomorrow night. Kofi had asked her to go with him. The night of the dance, Amina helped Moyo get ready. She put on his best shirt. You look handsome, she said, but her voice was distant. She was excited about the party. Moyo could hear it. He held her hand tightly. Amina, he began, but he did not know what to say. How could he ask her to stay in his dark world when she had just found the light? The music from the village square was loud and joyful. Moyo could hear the drums, the laughter, the clapping. He sat on a bench at the edge of the dance area, a lonely figure in the celebrating crowd. He could not see anything, but his ears painted a painful picture. He heard Amina's laugh, clear and happy. He heard Kofi's deep voice beside her. He heard the swish of their feet as they danced. It was the worst kind of darkness, being surrounded by joy he could not see and could no longer share. He had given his sight so she could see, and now she was using it to look at another man. The sacrifice felt like a cruel joke. The darkness in his heart was growing, and it was much, much darker than the blindness in his eyes. Moyo could not take it anymore. He stood up and, using his memory of the village, started to feel his way back home. He stumbled through the dark, his heart feeling as blind as his eyes. He was alone, truly alone. He had lost everything. When Amina came home, her cheeks were flushed with happiness. Moyo, it was wonderful. There were lanterns everywhere and the dancers. She stopped when she saw his face. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands clenched into fists. Moyo, what is wrong? You left me there? He said, his voice quiet and cold. You left me sitting in the dark while you danced with him. The anger and hurt he had been holding inside finally spilled out. I gave my eyes for you, and you forget about me as soon as something shinier comes along. Amina was shocked. She had never heard Moyo sound like this. That is not fair. You wanted me to see. I am just living the life you gave me, she shouted back. It was their first real fight. The words were like sharp stones thrown in the dark, and they left bruises on both their hearts. The next morning, a thick silence filled the house. Moyo felt a terrible guilt for his angry words, but he also felt a deep, gnawing pain. Amina felt confused and trapped. She was grateful to Moyo, but his sacrifice felt like a heavy chain around her neck. She loved the new world she could see, but she felt she had to hide her joy from him. Moyo decided to visit Mama Kofi again. He walked slowly, tapping his stick on the ground, his heart full of confusion. He found her outside her house, grinding herbs. Mama Kofi, he said, his voice desperate. There must be a way to fix this. She does not love me anymore. I want my sight back. Mama Kofi stopped her work. She did not need to see to know the pain on his face. She could hear it in his voice. Child, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The magic is done. The scales are balanced. You cannot take back a gift once it is given. The darkness you feel is not from your eyes. It is from your fear. You are blind in your heart, and that is a darkness I cannot cure. Moyo's hope shattered. There was no going back. He was blind forever, and he was losing Amina forever. He turned and walked away, the darkness now feeling like a prison, with no door. He was alone with his regret and his growing anger. Amina, feeling guilty after their fight, decided to take Moyo for a walk to their favorite spot by the river. She described the water, the trees, the birds, just like he used to do for her, but her words felt hollow to Moyo. He knew she was just trying to be kind. He could feel her mind was somewhere else. Suddenly, Moyo's foot slipped on the muddy riverbank. He lost his balance and fell into the cold water with a loud splash. He panicked. He could not see which way was up. The water filled his nose and mouth. He was drowning. Amina, help me, he cried out, flailing his arms. Amina screamed and jumped into the water. She grabbed him and pulled him to the shore. He coughed and gasped for air, shaking with fear and cold. He had never felt so helpless. He was a man who could not even save himself from a river. As she held him, soaking wet and trembling, Amina looked at his face. She saw the sheer terror in his unseeing eyes. She saw the vulnerability. And for a moment, she saw the man she had loved, the man who had given everything for her. Her heart ached with a mix of pity and a fading memory of love. But the feeling was crowded out by the memory of dancing under the lanterns with Kofi, of being strong and independent. She helped Moyo up, her own heart as confused as the muddy river water. After the river incident, Moyo became more quiet and withdrawn. He felt like a burden. Amina became more restless. She started going on long walks alone, telling Moyo she needed to clear her head. But Moyo knew. He could hear the lie in her voice. She was going to see Kofi. The village was talking. People whispered about the blind man and his wife, who was always with the handsome woodcarver. The whispers were like insects buzzing in Moyo's ears. He heard them at the well outside his window. Each whisper was a tiny knife cutting into his heart. The shame was almost as bad as the blindness. One evening, Amina did not come home for dinner. Moyo sat at the table, the food growing cold. The darkness in the house was absolute. He waited and waited, his worry slowly turning into a cold, hard certainty. She was with him. She had chosen him. When she finally came home, the moon was high. I am sorry, she said, not sounding sorry at all. I lost track of time. Moyo did not answer. He just sat in his chair, facing the wall. He knew then that he had lost her. The gift of sight had stolen her love. It was the worst kind of betrayal, because he had set it in motion himself. The next day, Moyo heard a sound he had come to dread. Kofi's voice at his door. Hello, Moyo, Kofi said. His voice was friendly, but Moyo could hear a hint of pity in it. I came to see if you needed anything. Amina told me about your fall. Moyo's hands curled into fists. He did not want pity from this man. He did not want his help. I need nothing from you, Moyo said, his voice like stone. I also wanted to talk to you about Amina. Kofi continued, lowering his voice. She is unhappy, Moyo. She feels trapped. She loves the light, And you are a reminder of the dark. Moyo felt like he had been punched in the stomach. To hear his deepest fear spoken out loud by his rival was unbearable. The anger that had been simmering inside him for weeks finally boiled over. "Get out," he whispered. Then he shouted, "Get out of my house." Kofi left quickly. Moyo was left alone, shaking with rage. The darkness around him was no longer just an absence of light. It was a living thing, filled with his anger and pain. He felt a terrifying thought creep into his mind. If he could not have Amina's love, then maybe no one could. A strange thing began to happen. Moyo's other senses, which had grown sharper since he lost his sight, became even more intense. He could hear the ants crawling on the floor. He could smell the rain coming hours before it arrived. And he started to hear things that were not really there. He heard Amina's voice whispering his name when she was not home. He heard faint, ghostly music from the village square, a constant reminder of the night she left him alone. He was losing his grip on reality. The line between what was real and what was in his mind began to blur. The darkness was not just outside him anymore. It was inside him, twisting his thoughts. Amina noticed the change in Moyo. He would sit for hours, without moving or speaking. Sometimes he would mutter to himself. He jumped at small sounds. He was becoming a stranger. She was afraid of him, and that fear pushed her even closer to Kofi. She started making plans to leave, to build a new life where she was not weighed down by guilt and darkness. One night, a powerful storm rolled over the village. The wind howled like a wounded animal. The rain hammered on the roof. The thunder was so loud it shook the house. For Moyo, it was a nightmare. The world was a chaos of terrifying noise. He curled up on his bed, covering his ears. Amina was not home. She was at Kofi's house, waiting for the storm to pass. Moyo was alone in the roaring dark. He felt the walls closing in. He felt the weight of his sacrifice, his betrayal, his loss, pressing down on him. He could not take it anymore. He screamed into the storm, a raw sound of pure despair. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm in his heart. When the storm finally calmed, Moyo was exhausted. He lay on his bed, listening to the dripping water. He heard the door open. It was Amina. "Moyo, are you all right?" she asked, her voice cautious. He did not answer. He just listened to her move around the room. He could smell the rain on her clothes, and underneath it, he could smell the scent of Kofi's woodshop. It was the smell of his betrayal. At that moment, something in Moyo broke. The love he had felt for her curdled into something else, something dark and dangerous. The next day, the sun came out. The village was clean and fresh from the rain. Amina decided it was time. She had to tell Moyo she was leaving. She could not live in this sadness anymore. She took a deep breath and walked into the house. "Moyo," she said, "we need to talk." Moyo was sitting in his chair. He was very still. He had been waiting for this. He knew what she was going to say. He could hear the finality in her voice. The love was gone. All that was left was the dark. "I am listening," he said, his voice eerily calm. Inside, the storm was still raging. He had lost his sight, he had lost his love, and now he was about to lose the last person in his world. The darkness was complete, but as he sat there, a new sense began to awaken in him. It was not sight, not sound, not smell. It was a deep, cold knowing. The magic had not just taken his sight. It had opened a door inside him to a different kind of power. A power born from pain and loss. And as Amina began to speak the words that would break them apart forever, Moyo began to see a new path in the darkness. A path of his own making. Amina's words were like stones dropping into a deep, dark well. "Moyo, I cannot stay. This house. It is full of shadows. I feel like I am drowning when I am here." She did not say Kofi's name, but his presence was a third person in the room, a ghost Moyo could not see, but could feel with every fiber of his being. Moyo did not turn his head. He kept his face towards the wall, his unseeing eyes open. The calmness in his voice was a thin sheet of ice over a raging river. "So, you are leaving me." It was not a question. "What else can I do?" Amina's voice cracked. "You are not the Moyo I knew. You are empty. And I need the sun, Moyo. I need it like air." She was crying now, soft tears for the man she once loved, for the guilt that was a heavy stone in her stomach. Moyo finally moved. He slowly stood up from his chair. He did not reach for his stick. He took one sure step, then another, directly towards the sound of her crying. He did not stumble. He moved through the dark room as if he could see every piece of furniture, as if a map of the house was burned into his mind. He stopped right in front of her. The closeness was uncomfortable. "The sun," he repeated, his voice a low whisper. "I gave you the sun, Amina, and you gave me your darkness. But you were wrong. This is not my darkness. It is ours. And you cannot leave it behind." He reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to point at her heart. "It is inside you too. I can feel it." A shiver ran down Amina's spine. He was wrong. He had to be wrong. She took a step back. "Goodbye, Moyo," she whispered, and she turned and walked out of the house, leaving the door open. A shaft of sunlight fell across the floor, a golden road leading away from him. Moyo stood perfectly still, listening to the sound of her footsteps until they faded into nothing. He was alone. The silence in the house was a living thing. It pressed in on his ears. He walked to the door and closed it, shutting out the sun, shutting out the world. He stood in the middle of the room, in the perfect blackness, and then he smiled. It was a small, cold smile. Mama Kofi was right. The deepest darkness was not in the eyes. He had been looking for it in the wrong place. He had been fighting the wrong enemy. He sat back down in his chair. He closed his eyes, though it made no difference. He stopped trying to hear the outside world, the birds, the children, the distant market sounds. Instead, he turned his hearing inward. He listened to the silence inside himself. He listened to the hole where his sight used to be. And deep within that hole, he found something. A thread. A thin, cold thread of connection. It was tied to Amina. He could feel it, a slight tug in his chest, a numb, frozen wire leading away from him, out the door, towards the village. He concentrated on it. He poured all his loneliness, all his anger, all his betrayal down that thread. He did not know if it would work. It was just a feeling, but he had nothing left to lose. Amina was arranging her few things in Kofi's small, sunny back room. She felt a wave of relief to be out of Moyo's dark house. She hung a yellow dress in the cupboard, a color she could now see and love. Suddenly, a cold feeling washed over her, like a cloud passing over the Sunday. She shivered and hugged herself. "Are you cold?" Kofi asked, coming to the doorway. He was smiling, but his smile seemed a little forced. The situation was strange, and the village was talking. "No, I am fine," Amina said, forcing a smile back. "Just a chill." But the feeling stayed with her. It was a feeling of being watched, even though she was alone in the room. It was a feeling of sadness, so deep it made her chest ache. She shook her head, trying to clear it. This was her new beginning. She would not let Moyo's shadow follow her here. That night, as she lay next to Kofi, she had a dream. She was back in the darkness, but it was a different kind of dark. It was Moyo's dark. She could feel his presence all around her, a cold, sad weight. She could hear his voice, not with her ears, but in her mind. "You cannot leave it behind," the voice whispered. She woke up with a start, her heart pounding. Kofi was sleeping soundly beside her. The room was quiet. It was just a dream. But the next day, it happened again. She was at the market, buying fruit, laughing at a joke, Kofi told. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hit her. The vibrant colors of the market, the red tomatoes, the green peppers seemed to dim, as if a filter had been placed over her eyes. For a split second, the world went gray. She blinked, and it was normal again. "What is it?" Kofi asked, his hand on her arm. "Nothing," she said, her voice shaky. "The sun was in my eyes, but the sun was behind a cloud." She looked around, a strange fear growing in her. Was she getting sick? Moyo felt it. A flicker, a tiny, distant spark of fear that was not his own. It traveled down the cold thread and touched his heart. He had been sitting in his chair for hours, doing nothing but focusing on that thread, feeding it with his pain. And he had felt something. Her fear. A slow, dawning understanding began to grow in him. The magic had not just taken his sight and given it to Amina. It had tied them together. He had taken her blindness, and in doing so, he had created a bridge between their souls. He could not see the world, but he could now feel her world. He could feel her emotions. He concentrated harder. He remembered the joy on her face when she first saw the market. He remembered the sound of her laughter with Kofi. He took those memories and he twisted them, pouring his own jealousy and hurt into them. He sent the feeling down the thread like a poison. Amina was helping Kofi in his workshop. He was teaching her how to sand a piece of wood to make it smooth. She was enjoying the feeling of the wood under her fingers, the smell of the sawdust. Kofi put his hand over hers to show her the correct motion. It was a gentle, kind gesture. But as his hand touched hers, a violent image flashed in Amina's mind. It was Moyo, falling into the river, his face contorted in terror, his mouth open in a silent scream. A feeling of cold, murky water closed over her, and she couldn't breathe. She gasped and jerked her hand away from Kofi, stumbling back. Amina, what is wrong? Kofi's face was full of concern. I felt like I was drowning, she choked out, her hand on her throat. The feeling was fading, but the memory of it was sharp and clear. It was Moyo's memory. It was his terror, and she had felt it as if it were her own. She looked towards the direction of her old home, a new and terrible understanding dawning on her. Moyo's words echoed in her head. You cannot leave it behind. It is inside you, too. He wasn't just speaking in metaphors. The connection was real. Her freedom was an illusion. She had escaped his house, but she had not escaped him. Moyo, sitting in his dark chair, felt her realization. He felt her dawning horror, and for the first time since she left, he did not feel powerless. He felt a grim, dark satisfaction. She was not with Kofi, laughing in the Sunday. She was here, in the dark, with him. He was no longer a lonely man in a silent house. He was a spider in the center of a web, and he had just felt his prey touch the first silken strand. The game had begun. The satisfaction was a cold, sharp stone in Moyo's chest. He held on to the feeling, focusing on it, making it the center of his dark world. He had found his new sense. It was not sight, not sound. It was Amina. Her emotions were now his colors. Her fear was a brilliant, shocking red. Her confusion was a murky, swirling gray. He could paint his darkness with the feelings she tried to hide from him. He stood up and began to move around the small house again. But this time, his movements were not those of a lost man. They were deliberate, purposeful. He did not need a stick. He had the thread. It pulled him, guided him. He went to the kitchen and found a knife. His fingers traced the sharp edge. He did not want to hurt her body. He wanted to hurt her peace. He wanted to cut the happiness she had found without him. He held the knife and thought of Kofi. He thought of Kofi's hand on Amina's. He poured all his jealousy, all his rage, down the invisible thread that connected him to her. It was a poison arrow, shot from the depths of his blindness. Amina was trying to drink tea with Kofi, but her hands would not stop shaking. The memory of the drowning feeling was stuck in her throat, making it hard to swallow. You are not well, Kofi said, his brow furrowed with worry. You have been pale all morning. Maybe you should rest. Before she could answer, a searing pain shot through her palm. It was sharp and sudden, like a cut. She cried out and dropped her cup. It shattered on the floor. Amina! Kofi rushed to her side. She held up her hand, expecting to see blood. But there was nothing. Her skin was unbroken, yet the pain was real. It was a clean, hot line of agony across her palm. As quickly as it came, it faded, leaving behind a throbbing, ghostly memory. What happened? Kofi asked, his voice tight with alarm. I felt a cut. On my hand. She stared at her perfect, uninjured skin. A terrible, impossible thought was forming in her mind. Moyo's words, I took your darkness. Had he taken more than just her blindness? Had he taken her very connection to pain? There is no cut, Kofi said, his confusion turning to frustration. Amina, what is going on? Is this about Moyo? She looked at him, her eyes wide with a fear he could not understand. How could she explain that the man she left was somehow still touching her, hurting her from across the village? It sounded like madness. She pulled her hand close to her chest. It was nothing, she whispered. A cramp. But she knew. The thread was not just for feelings anymore. It was for pain. Moyo felt the echo of her shock, the reverberation of her fear. It was better than he had imagined. He had focused on the memory of a cut, the sensation of sharp metal on skin, and he had sent it to her, and she had received it. He had not just taken her blindness. He was becoming a part of her nervous system. He put the knife down. He didn't need it. His mind was the weapon. He decided to experiment. He walked to the cold fireplace and carefully held his hand close to the ashes where a few embers might still hold heat. He focused on the idea of burning, the searing, blistering sensation of fire. He did not touch the embers. He just imagined the pain, vividly, and pushed that imagination down the thread towards Amina. Amina was helping Kofi sweep the sawdust from his workshop. She was trying to act normal, to push the strange events from her mind. Suddenly, she gasped and stumbled back, clutching her right hand. An intense, burning pain enveloped it, as if she had thrust it into a fire. The sensation was so real she could almost smell her own skin burning. Tears sprang to her eyes. Not again! Kofi's voice was no longer just concerned. It was edged with fear and impatience. Amina, there is nothing wrong with your hand. She stared at her hand, whole and unburned, while the phantom pain slowly faded, leaving a deep, psychic sting. She looked at Kofi, at his handsome, worried, but now slightly distant face, and she knew. She was breaking in front of him. The strong, sighted woman he was falling in love with was cracking, and the scared, connected to darkness girl was leaking out. It is Moyo, she finally said, her voice trembling. He is doing this. Kofi stared at her. Amina, he is blind. He is sitting in his dark house. How can he be doing this? I don't know, she cried, her composure shattering. The magic, it connected us. I can feel what he feels. I think he is making me feel what he wants me to feel. The truth of it was horrifying. She wasn't just feeling his emotions, she was feeling his manufactured sensations. Kofi was silent for a long moment. He looked at her as if seeing a stranger. This is not normal, Amina. This is spirit work, dark magic. He took a step back from her. You brought this with you. His words were a different kind of cut, deeper than any knife. He was not just doubting her. He was rejecting the darkness that was now a part of her. The very darkness Moyo had warned her about. Moyo, sitting in his chair, felt the new emotion bloom in Amina. It was a complex, ugly color. It was the crushing weight of rejection. He felt Kofi pulling away from her. He felt her isolation. It was perfect. He had not just shared a pain, he had created a rift. He was in their home, in their relationship, a ghost at their table. He was no longer the victim left behind. He was the puppeteer, and his strings were tied to the heart of the woman who had left him. She had wanted to be free of his darkness, but he was proving to her, in the most painful way possible, that his darkness was now hers to keep. The game was no longer about getting her back. It was about making sure she could never truly leave. The silence in Kofi's workshop was heavier than any piece of wood. He stared at Amina, his tools forgotten in his hands. The woman before him was shaking, her eyes wide with a terror he could not see or understand. Spirit, work, dark magic. These were things from his grandmother's stories, not things that happened in the bright light of day. Kofi, Amina whispered, her voice pleading. You have to believe me. I believe you are scared, he said carefully, putting down his chisel. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I believe something is happening. But Amina, a man sending pain across the village? It is not possible. He wanted to comfort her, but a cold knot of doubt was tightening in his stomach. Had he brought a cursed woman into his home? Amina saw the doubt in his eyes. It was a wall going up between them, built from fear. The connection to Moyo was a poison, and it was spreading, killing the new life she had tried to build. She felt a fresh wave of despair, and this one was entirely her own. Moyo felt it, of course. Her despair was a sweet, dark syrup to him. He drank it in. He had learned he could send sensations. Now he wondered if he could send more. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He didn't just remember a feeling. He crafted a memory. He pieced together the sound of her laughter from the night of the dance, the scent of Kofi's woodshop, the image of Kofi's smiling face that she had so vividly described to him. He wove them all together into a perfect, happy moment. And then he poured acid over it. He injected a feeling of deep, gut-wrenching shame into the memory. The shame of betraying the man who had given everything for her. He pushed this corrupted memory down the thread, a gift-wrapped bomb of regret. Amina was trying to help Kofi stack finished carvings. She picked up a small, beautifully carved bird. As her fingers touched the smooth wood, the memory hit her like a physical blow. It was the night of the dance. She could hear the music, see the lanterns. She felt Kofi's hand in hers, the joy of the dance. But suddenly, a crushing weight of shame pressed down on her. The joy felt dirty, wrong. A voice that sounded like her own, but colder, whispered in her mind, "You are dancing on his sacrifice. You are happy in the light he can never see. You are a thief of joy." The happy memory twisted, curdling into something ugly and painful. She dropped the wooden bird, her hand flying to her mouth as a sob escaped her. The feeling was so intense, so personal, it felt like her own thought, her own truth. "What is it now?" Kofi's voice was strained. He was not looking at her with concern anymore, but with a weary frustration. I remembered the dance," she stammered, tears streaming down her face. "And I felt so ashamed." Kofi sighed, a long, heavy sound. "Amina, this cannot continue. You jump at nothing. You cry over memories. I am starting to think maybe you are not well in your head." His words were the final blow. He thought she was going mad. And maybe she was. How could you know what was real when someone else could plant feelings inside your mind? The foundation of her new world, built on sight and freedom, was cracking and splintering. She was losing Kofi, and Moyo was making it happen. A new emotion began to burn in her, cutting through the shame and despair. Anger. A hot, sharp anger directed at Moyo. He had not taken her darkness. He had become a darkness far greater than blindness. He was violating her from the inside out. Moyo felt the anger ignite in her. It was a spiky, orange heat. It surprised him. He had expected more fear, more submission. This was different. This was a challenge. A slow smile spread across his face. The game was becoming more interesting. Amina wiped her tears away, her jaw tightening. She looked at Kofi, who was deliberately not looking at her, busying himself with his work. "I am going out," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Where?" Kofi asked, not looking up. "To see Mama Kofi." This made him look up. His eyes were wide with alarm. "No, Amina, do not go back to that place. That is where this started. That is where it will end," Amina said, and she walked out of the workshop, leaving the scent of sawdust and disappointment behind. She marched through the village, her sight now feeling like a curse. Every bright color, every smiling face was a reminder of the life Moyo was systematically destroying. She was not going to beg Mama Kofi to reverse the magic. She was going to demand to know how to break the connection. She would rather be blind and free than sighted and trapped in Moyo's personal darkness. As she walked, Moyo followed her progress through their link. He felt her determination, her rage. It was a clean, strong emotion, and for a moment it intimidated him. She was fighting back. He concentrated, trying to send a wave of confusion, to make her forget why she was going to Mama Kofi's, to make her lose her way. But her anger was a shield. The confusion splashed against it and faded. She knew where she was going, and she knew why. For the first time, the thread felt taut, a two-way street. He was not just a puppeteer, he was tied to the puppet, and the puppet had just decided to cut the strings. He stood up from his chair, a flicker of his own fear entering his heart. He couldn't let her do that. The connection was all he had left. Without it, he was just a blind man in an empty house. He had to stop her. But how? He couldn't see. He couldn't go after her. Or could he? He focused on the thread, not on sending something to her, but on pulling himself towards her. He pictured the path to Mama Kofi's house, the turns she would take, and the big baobab tree that marked the final path. He poured all his will, all his desperate need to control her, into the thread. He didn't want to send a feeling. He wanted to send a command. Amina was almost at the baobab tree. She could see its massive, gnarled trunk in the distance. Suddenly, her legs felt heavy, like she was wading through thick mud. A powerful foreign thought pushed into her mind, a thought that was not her own. "Stop. Turn around. Go home." It was Moyo's voice. Not in her ears, but in her soul. She froze, her body fighting her will. One foot refused to step in front of the other. She gritted her teeth, pouring all her anger into resisting. "No," she whispered aloud to him, to the voice in her head. You do not control me. She forced her foot to take a step, then another. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, like walking against a powerful river current. But she was moving. She was winning. Back in the dark house, Moyo gasped. He felt her resistance, a solid, immovable wall. She was defying him. The control he had so recently discovered was slipping. The puppet was cutting the strings, and he was powerless to stop it. A new, terrifying sensation bloomed within him, the chilling fear of being truly and completely alone again. But this time, with the full knowledge of what he had lost and what he had become, the darkness around him was no longer a weapon. It was just darkness. And it was waiting for him. Amina took another step. The command from Moyo was a thick, sticky web, trying to hold her in place. It whispered of comfort in the dark, of the safety of giving up. But her anger was a fire, burning the web away. She focused on the massive baobab tree, its branches like arms reaching for the sky. She would reach Mama Kofi. She would find a way to be free. With a final, wrenching effort of will, she broke through the invisible barrier. The pressure in her mind vanished so suddenly she stumbled forward, catching herself on the rough bark of the great tree. She was drenched in sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs. But she was there. She had won the first battle. She looked down the path to Mama Kofi's small house. It seemed longer and darker than she remembered. Taking a deep breath, she started walking. Inside his house, Moyo slumped forward, his head in his hands. The feedback from her breaking his command was a sharp, psychic slap. For a moment, the thread had gone silent. Not gone, but dormant, like a snake waiting to strike. He could still feel her, a faint buzz in the back of his mind, but he could no longer push his will onto her. The control was broken. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at his throat. What had he done? He had used his only connection to her as a weapon, and now it was broken. He was alone, truly, utterly alone in the silent, sightless prison of his own making. The satisfaction he had felt was gone, replaced by a yawning emptiness that was far worse than the initial blindness. He had become a monster to keep her close, and in doing so, he had guaranteed she would never, ever return. The darkness was no longer his ally. It was his judge, and it had found him guilty. Amina knocked on Mama Kofi's door, her knuckles rapping softly against the old wood. The door creaked open. Mama Kofi stood there, her milky eyes seeming to look right through Amina. She didn't look surprised. "You have been walking a difficult path, child," she said, her voice a dry rustle. "Come in." The hut was just as Amina remembered, smelling of herbs and dust. "He is hurting me," Amina blurted out, the words tumbling out in a rush. "From far away, he sends me pain. He puts bad feelings in my head. He tried to stop me from coming here." Mama Kofi nodded slowly, gesturing for Amina to sit. "I warned him, the deepest darkness is not in the eyes. He went looking for it in the wrong place, and he found a power he did not understand. The magic did not just move the blindness. It tied your spirits together. A bridge was made." "Can you break the bridge?" Amina asked, her voice desperate. Mama Kofi was silent for a long time. "A bridge can be burned from both sides, but fire is dangerous. It can burn the travelers, too." She leaned forward. "The thread is made of his pain and your guilt. To break it, one of you must truly let go. He must release his anger, or you must release your shame." Amina stared at her. Let go of her shame? How could she? Every moment of happiness she had felt with Kofi was shadowed by the memory of Moyo's sacrifice. Her sight was a gift paid for with his darkness. The shame was a part of her now, woven into the very thread Mama Kofi spoke of. "What if we can't?" Amina whispered. "Then the bridge remains," Mama Kofi said gravely. "And you will be tied to his darkness, and he to your light, forever. A constant war inside your souls." Back in the village, Kofi was cleaning his workshop, his movements sharp and angry. He was scared. Scared of the change in Amina. Scared of the things she said. Scared of the strange energy that had entered his life. He loved the Amina who laughed in the sunlight, not the one who cried out in pain for no reason. He felt tricked. He had been given a beautiful, sighted woman, but she had come with a hidden curse. When Amina returned, her face was pale but determined. "Mama Kofi says the magic tied us together. The only way to break it is for one of us to let go." Kofi put down his rag. "Let go of what?" "His anger. Or my shame." She looked at him, her eyes pleading for understanding. I have to try, Kofi. I have to find a way to not feel guilty for being happy with you. Kofi looked away. The words sounded simple, but the reality felt complicated and dangerous. And what happens while you are trying, Amina? How long will you jump in the shadows? How long will you feel his pain? He shook his head. I am a carver. I work with wood. It is solid. It is real. This spirit business, I cannot live inside it. Amina felt his words like a physical blow. She had hoped for his support, his strength. Instead, she saw him pulling away, building a wall of his own. I need time, she said softly. I do not know if time will help, Kofi replied, his voice quiet but firm. I think maybe you need to fix this with Moyo before you can be here with me. He was asking her to leave. The hope that had flickered in her after seeing Mama Kofi sputtered and died. She had lost. She had lost Moyo to darkness, and now she was losing Kofi to fear. The thread connecting her to Moyo hummed, and she felt a new emotion from him, faint but clear. It was not anger or control. It was a regret, deep, hollow, and hopeless. He had felt her loss, and for a moment, their shared despair flowed freely across the bridge, uniting them in a way their love never had. She had nowhere to go. The village saw her as a cursed woman. Kofi's home was no longer hers. Moyo's house was a prison of darkness. She was trapped in the space between, tied to a man she feared by a thread of shared misery. The war was not over. It had just changed. It was no longer a battle for control, but a slow, painful siege of the soul, and she was losing on all fronts. The silence in Kofi's workshop was final. Amina looked at him, at the strong hands that had held hers, now clenched at his sides. He wouldn't meet her eyes. She had no more words. Picking up her small bag, the one she had brought with so much hope, she walked out into the evening air. She stood in the street, the dust settling around her feet. The village lights were starting to twinkle. To her left was the path leading back to the center of the village, to the whispers and the staring eyes. To her right, the dark, winding path that led to Moyo's house, a place that now felt more dangerous than any forest. Straight ahead was the unknown, the world beyond the village. But the thread pulled her to the right. It was a dull, aching tug in her chest, a compass needle pointing toward her misery. She was homeless, but she was not free. Her feet, heavy with a fate she had not chosen, began to walk the familiar path back to Moyo. Moyo felt her coming. The thread, which had been a silent, numb wire, began to vibrate with a slow, grim rhythm. It was not the bright fear or the hot anger he had grown used to. This was a deeper, colder feeling. Defeat, resignation. He felt her footsteps as if they were his own, each one bringing her closer to the prison he had made for them both. He did not feel victorious. The emptiness inside him yawned wider. He had wanted to prove she couldn't leave him, and he had succeeded. But the cost was her spirit. He had broken the thing he loved most, and all he had won was a broken companion for his broken world. The house was dark, but the darkness inside him was deeper. The door creaked open. Amina stood there, silhouetted against the last light of the day. She didn't speak. She simply stepped inside and closed the door, plunging them both into the same utter blackness. Kofi, Moyo began, his voice a dry croak. Is gone, Amina finished, her voice flat, empty. There is nowhere else for me to go. She didn't move from the door. She was in the house, but she was a world away. Moyo wanted to say he was sorry. The words had a bitter taste in his mouth, but he knew they were useless. Sorry would not give her back her freedom. Sorry would not give him back his sight. Sorry would not burn the bridge that bound them together in this shared suffering. So they sat in the dark, two islands of pain, in a sea of silence. The thread between them was no longer a weapon or a tool. It was a chain, and they were both its prisoners. Days bled into one another. Amina moved through the house like a ghost. She cooked, she cleaned, but her movements were automatic. She no longer described the world to Moyo. What was the point? The colors felt like a betrayal, and every beautiful thing she saw only deepened the chasm of guilt between them. Moyo tried to reach out once, his hand fumbling in the dark to find hers. She flinched away as if his touch were fire. The connection was now purely in their minds. Physical contact was unbearable. The war was over, replaced by a cold peace, a terrible truce. They were tied together, but more alone than they had ever been. Moyo's world was dark and silent. Amina's world was bright and full of life, but she was forced to view it from inside a cage of her own making, a cage whose bars were made of Moyo's sacrifice and her own inability to forget it. One afternoon, Amina was washing clothes by the well. She saw children playing, their laughter ringing in the clear air. She felt a pang of her old joy, a spark of the woman she used to be. Instantly, a wave of corrosive shame from Moyo washed over her, smothering the spark. He had felt her moment of happiness and, instinctively, had punished her for it. She didn't fight it this time. She let the shame wash over her, accepting it. This was her life now. This was the price of her sight. But deep down, in a place the thread could not quite reach, a new resolve was forming. It was small and hard, like a seed buried under winter frost. Mama Kofi had said the bridge could be burned from both sides. Moyo would never let go of his anger. It was all he had left. So, it was up to her. She had to let go of her shame. She didn't know how. It felt impossible. But the alternative was to live and die in this shared darkness. A prisoner in a body that could see the sun, but was forever chained to the night. That night, as they sat in the endless dark, Amina spoke for the first time in days. "I am not sorry I can see, Moyo." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Moyo flinched. The thread trembled with his shock. This was not defeat. This was defiance. "I am sorry for your darkness," she continued, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I am sorry for the pain I caused you, but I will not be sorry for the light. I will not." She was speaking to the darkness, but she was also speaking to the part of him that lived inside her, the voice that whispered of her guilt. She was taking her first small step toward the fire that could burn the bridge. It was a dangerous step. She had no idea what would happen if she truly let go. Would she be free? Or would the magic, unbalanced, collapse upon them both? The war was over, but the most dangerous battle, the battle for her own soul, had just begun. The silence after her words was heavier than before. Moyo did not respond. He couldn't. Her statement was a stone dropped into the stagnant pond of their shared existence, and the ripples were shaking the very foundation of the magical bond. The thread hummed, not with his anger, but with a stunned, vibrating silence. She had named the unnameable. She had rejected the very guilt that gave the connection its power. For days, Amina practiced. Every time she saw something beautiful, a butterfly, a sunset, she would consciously think, "This is mine. I deserve to see this." At first, the shame would crash over her instantly, a knee-jerk reaction sent by Moyo's subconscious. She would feel nauseous. Her vision would blur with unshed tears. But she would stand her ground. She would not look away from the beauty. She would let the shame wash over her, and then she would take another mental step forward. "I am not sorry." It was exhausting. It was a war fought in the quiet of her own mind, with an enemy that was both external and a part of her. She grew thin and pale. Moyo could feel her struggle, a constant, grinding effort that was slowly, imperceptibly, changing the texture of the thread. It was becoming thinner, more brittle. He fought back. He sent her memories of his loneliness, the feel of the cold floor, the terror of stumbling in the dark. He sent her the sound of her own laughter from the night of the dance, hoping to twist it into a weapon. But Amina was learning. When the memories came, she would not run from them. She would acknowledge them. That was a sad moment, she would think, or that was a happy sound. She separated the event from the guilt. She was refusing to let his pain become her punishment. The balance of power was shifting. Moyo felt his control, his influence, slipping through his fingers like sand. The darkness he had wielded as a weapon was being disarmed by her simple, stubborn refusal to be ashamed of the light. He was left with only the raw, unedited pain, and it was a crushing weight. One afternoon, a week after her declaration, Amina was in the market. She saw a couple, their hands linked, smiling at each other. A year ago, this would have been a scene she could only imagine. Now, she could see the love in their eyes. The old, familiar shame tried to rise, the voice whispering that she had thrown away such a love. But this time, Amina did something different. She looked at the couple, and she felt a different emotion. Not shame, but grief. A clean, sharp grief for what she and Moyo had lost. It was her grief, not his. It belonged to her. The moment the pure, unmanipulated grief touched her heart, Something snapped. Back in the house, Moyo cried out, clutching his chest. It felt like a wire, pulled taut for months, had suddenly been cut. The constant, low-level hum of Amina's presence in his mind vanished. The thread was gone. The bridge was burned. For a moment, there was only silence. A profound, empty silence he had not known since before the magic. He was alone. Truly, completely alone in the dark. A sob wrenched from his throat, a sound of pure, desolate loss. Amina, standing in the bright market, gasped. The weight was gone. The constant pressure in her mind, the second layer of emotion that had colored her every thought, had disappeared. She felt light, empty, but clean. She could see the world, and the sight was entirely her own. The guilt was gone. She had let it go, and the magic, starved of its fuel, had dissolved. She didn't run. She walked slowly back to the house, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a terrible, fragile hope. She pushed the door open. Moyo was on the floor, curled into a ball, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The sight of him, broken and alone, filled her not with the old, obligated pity, but with a deep, human sadness. "Moyo," she said softly. He flinched, turning his unseeing face towards her. "You're gone," he whispered, his voice raw. "I can't feel you anymore." "I know," she said. "The connection is broken." He began to weep openly then, great, heaving sobs of utter defeat. He had lost everything. Her, his sight, and now the terrible, twisted connection that had been his only companion. Amina did not go to him. She did not touch him. She knew that any comfort she offered would be a lie, a shadow of what was once between them. But she could not leave him like this. "I will not stay with you, Moyo," she said, her voice clear and calm in the dark room. "What we had is gone. It was poisoned by the magic and by our choices. But I will not leave you alone in the dark." She walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtain. A shaft of late afternoon sunlight cut through the gloom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It did nothing for Moyo's blindness, but it changed the feeling of the room. "I will find someone from the village to come and help you," she continued, "to cook for you, to keep you company. I will make sure you are cared for. It is the last thing I can do for the man you were before all of this." It was not forgiveness, it was mercy, a final act of kindness to sever them completely. Moyo heard the truth in her words. He heard the finality. The war was over. He had lost. But in his utter defeat, a strange, small peace began to settle over him. The desperate need to hold on to control was gone. There was nothing left to fight for. There was only the darkness and himself. Amina turned and walked out of the house for the last time. She stood outside, breathing in the free air. She was alone, but she was whole. She had her sight, she had her life. And the path ahead, while uncertain, was hers to walk, unburdened by another's darkness. Inside, Moyo sat in the beam of sunlight he could not see, but could feel warmth on his skin. He was blind. He was alone. But the terrible, gnawing connection was gone. The silence in his mind was his own. It was a devastating freedom, but it was a start. The story of Moyo and Amina was over, burned away by the fire of her courage. Two separate lives now began, forever marked by magic, but finally, blessedly, their own.